Yeah, so welcome everyone to the Forage online bootcamp. I hope everyone can hear me. Okay. I'm Adam Nagy, one of the Forage developer advocates, and I'm going to take you through some of these tutorials during this week. So the event format, if you haven't attended one of these before, then here's some information about it. So there are 4 days. We started today, and every day of the week from now on, we'll provide some tutorial. There's one for the EMEA region, and there's also one for the Americas. And we are also providing 2 parallel webinars. So one is for .NET. This is the class that you're attending, and there my colleague is providing a Node.js version of the same tutorial on another invite. So you can choose between these 2. And what happens during the webinar is we are talking about certain things, giving some description about the given Forge technology that the tutorial is about. Then we'll start following the online tutorial that's publicly available for everyone. We are going through the steps, also talking about what the various parts of the code are doing. And of course, you can, during all these presentations, you can ask questions. So there is a chat, or well, I prefer the Q&A panel, that's the best. And then I can make my answer available for everyone. So if you have any questions, just use the Q&A panel, type in your question, and then I can either unmute you and then we can discuss something, or I just answer the question directly or type it into the Q&A panel. And even while I'm not presenting and you're working on your code yourself, you can always ask questions, and I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. So yeah, that's the main thing. And of course, as I said, I'm recording this, so the recording should be available afterwards, after the event. So today is the first one, which is about the simple viewer. This tutorial will show you how you can upload your designs to Forge, get them translated to the viewable format, which then you can preview inside your own web page. Then tomorrow we'll have a sort of similar tutorial, but in that case, it's about hubs, meaning that if you have some kind of storage account with Autodesk, whether it's Fusion Team, BIM 360 Docs, or ACC, Autodesk Docs, then this tutorial will show you how you can access those hubs that you have access to and list the projects, files, versions, everything in them. And in that case, we will be using a 3-legged authentication because the user needs to approve your application's access to their data. So that will be the 3rd leg. So again, just browsing projects and data. And then just like today, tomorrow as well, you will be able to then preview a given file that you're interested in directly inside your own web page. And then Thursday, it's all about the viewer, how you can extend its functionality, how you can do customizations through taking advantage of so-called extensions, which are like add-ins for the viewer that you can create, and how you can access the data that was extracted from the original model into the viewable format. And then you can do manipulations with them, provide various dashboards and things, and also adding custom UI to the viewer. So maybe some command button to the toolbar and things like that. And then on Friday, it's about configurators. We have a technology called design automation. And that's the only thing currently that enables you to modify your existing models, the original models, like, if you have a Revit model, Inventor model, Autodesk, DWG file or something like that. This technology enables you to create new ones of those or modify them. And so once you modify the design, it's also going to be translating that, and then again, preview the results, what happened during the configuration. So when I get back to day 1, which is today, so it's about the simple viewer. And there are a well, first of all, let's see what the sample is going to be doing. So it's going to allow you to just, click a button and then upload your own designs. And in the background, it's going to kick off the translation automatically. And as soon as the model is translated, you will be able to view it inside the viewer. And of course, all the viewer provided functionalities will be available, including, as you can see, the measurement, then the model browser, providing you all the object hierarchy inside the model on the left side. And on the right side, you can see the property palette. So everything that was extracted, all the metadata that was extracted from the original model will be listed in this properties panel. And then when you select something in the user interface, then those properties will show the relevant values. And there are other functionalities as well, like explode or whatever is available inside the viewer. So those all will be available. So the agenda for today, the times are in GMT. So for example, I'm based in the UK, so we are GMT +1. If you're in Central Europe somewhere, in that case, it's GMT +2. So for me, it was like 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. And then so there are like 1 hour allocated session times. As you can see, this one starts, if you're looking at the GMT, then 8 to 9. Then there's like a 30 minutes break, and then another hour session, 30 minutes break, and so on. So the first one will be intro and setup, just what you need on your system in order to get started with pretty much any of the tutorials we have. And then how to create the new project and set things up server side, and also deal with the authentication. That's the next session. And then the third one will be adding functionality related to uploading and then translating models. And then the last one will be about adding all the UI functionality as well, the HTML file, JavaScript files, and then embedding the viewer inside the web page. So these are the 4 sections for today. So the times are approximate. You decide how fast we go. So I guess I could, well, we'll see how things go. I might try to stick to these times because some people might, join this tutorial a bit later, and then maybe they are expecting that the server and authentication part takes place at a certain time. So maybe I just leave things as they are. We'll see. So the first part is intro and setup. So this is what you need. First of all, you have to make sure that you have a Forge account. If you don't have a subscription yet, you can just simply start a trial. You can log in with your existing Autodesk account. If you don't have an Autodesk account either, then you can create one straight away for free. That should be available. And once you have that, then you can log in and you can start creating new applications using your credential. So all you have to do is this thing is in the way. Yeah, so as you can see, you can just go forge.autodesk.com. Let's start from the beginning. And then you can log in. If you're already logged in, or once you're logged in, then this menu will show up. You will find your applications, where you can either modify any of your existing applications or just click create a new application. And once you created this new application, then it will provide you straight away with a client ID and client secret. Take note of these because these are one of the values that you're going to be needing when going through the tutorial. And it doesn't matter for today, but if you're attending the session tomorrow as well, probably better to stick with the correct value straight away. So you can just use this callback URL value for your application. And best thing is just to keep everything selected for the time being. Later on, you can also customize if you want to limit the given Forge app's access to certain Forge components, then you can do that. But for the time being, since it's just you're just testing things, best thing just leave everything as is. And then once you have that, you just make sure you also save the changes. And then the developer environment for today and tomorrow will be Visual Studio Community 2022. This is the latest version of Visual Studio, so we thought we might as well use that for these tutorials. So you can simply go to this address and then can download it. And when you're installing Visual Studio, just make sure you have these two components selected. You might need .NET Desktop development later on, and definitely ASP.NET and web development as well for today and tomorrow. So this is the location, visualstudio.microsoft.com/vs/community. And you can simply download Visual Studio. It should offer you the two installs. There you go. You can just simply download it and start running the installer on your system. So that's all at the moment. It's just about, getting your system ready for the tutorial. If you have any questions, then let me know. I will be here all along, so you can always ask questions if there are any issues. And then otherwise, we'll get back at the time that we provided previously, if you remember. So it should be 10:30 my time, 11:30 Central European time. We will get back with the next part of the presentation, where we will start working on the server and authentication. So these are the tasks for you at the moment. So just let me know if you have any questions, and I'm happy to answer. Hi everyone. So hopefully you managed to finish these two steps. They should have taken not much time at all. So 1 hour's time was basically plenty. So it was just, making sure you have a Forge app. On the Forge website, you created that, and then you have Visual Studio 2022 installed. So now comes the second section, where we actually start implementing the solution provided by the tutorial. So first of all, just creating the solution, and then also implementing, we're setting up the server-side things, and also implementing authentication in it. This is how most of the applications that we are working with are structured. So as you can see, we have Forge that, of course, we are using in all these tutorials. And on the server side, we have the usual files, HTML, JavaScript, CSS, etc., which are providing all the user interface for your client. And then we have the client-side code, which will be coming from the JavaScript file that will be running directly inside the browser. And all the queries that are using or taking advantage of the Forge functionality are actually going through the server side. So on the server side, we will be implementing or exposing some endpoints that the client-side code will be able to call. And in return, those codes will then send queries to the Autodesk Forge services, apart from the viewer. So the viewer is the only part which is communicating directly with the Forge service once we provided for it a client-side access token, or like a public access token that we call inside the code. So all this functionality, which is communication from the server side to Forge, those will be implemented as services. It will make sense in a second when we start implementing the solution. And these will be the connectors which are implementing, as you can see, for example, this is JavaScript code, but the logic is pretty much the same in .NET as well. So you're exposing endpoints. In case of .NET, it's through connectors that the client-side code will be able to call. And that's, again, then the server side, on the server side, we're going to be reaching out to Forge, get the messages back, and then pass it back down to the client. So this is how the application is going to be working. So we can just initialize a new project, install dependencies, prepare the app configuration in the startup CS file, launch configuration. in app settings development JSON, where we can provide our client ID, client secret, then create a basic server inside program CS, and then we can test it out as well. So we can actually run it, though we won't see much because the user interface at this point is still missing. And then we are also implementing the authentication part, so generating access token. So this is what I mentioned before. So I was wrong. So it's not connectors, it's controllers, which are exposing the endpoints. So the services like Forge service and the authentication related parts in Forge service.auth, those are implementing the functionality which is talking directly to Forge from our server. And then the at server endpoints, this authentication controller is providing an endpoint that will enable the client to request an access token from the server side. And then you can test it out as well. So these are the two things we are going to be implementing. So we can just go back to the website. And before I do that, actually, it might be worth pointing out. So if you're on the Forge developer website, then you can just go to documentation. And then you will see the various components which are available. It already came up as one of the questions related to, the APIs that you selected. So what is listed here are the same components which, of course, you can find in the documentation. So Autodesk Construction Cloud, etc. Again, today we are only be using data management API in order to upload files to Forge, and then the model derivative API to translate those files to a viewable format which then we can load inside the Forge viewer. So just try to remember these components. You will find exactly the same ones in the documentation, on the documentation on the Forge website: authentication, data exchange, data management, model derivative. So these are the two components we are using: data management and model derivative. So you can find some more information about them as well here on the website. See the various endpoints that they are implementing. Okay, so for example, model derivative, you can see the jobs that you can run. So when you start the job, that's when you start translating a given file. But you will see some more information about it as you start implementing the code or implementing the solution. So let's get back here. So this is the simple viewer tutorial that we are following today. Here you can see again a quick demo of what we are going to be end up with. So it enables you to upload your file, then it's going to translate it in the background and then list it in this drop down box in the top right corner, where you can select the model that you want to view inside the viewer. And then all the viewing related functionality will be available, including measuring, sectioning, and all the rest. So authenticate, these are the components we are going to be using. Authentication, that's something that you always need to use, because first of all, you have to authenticate with Forge. But the extra components that you are using today is data management and model derivative. And the viewer is just a client-side API. So it's not something that you need to enable, for example, when you're creating your Forge application. Viewer is not going to be listed, and also authentication is not going to be listed, because it's obvious that you will need authentication before you can start using any of the Forge services. And if you get completely stuck or you're missing some steps, you can always find actually the finished solutions here. So for Node.js, this is the GitHub repo. And for .NET, this is the GitHub repo where you find the finished solution. But this is how we can create it. So we are going to be sticking with Visual Studio 2022 today and tomorrow as well. So all you have to do is create a new project, select an ASP.NET Core empty. And as I said in one of the questions that came from you, it's better to stick with the exact naming. So the exact things which are provided used in the tutorial, just in case For example, the project name is actually being used in one of the namespaces. And we are going to be using .NET 6. And then we'll also have to add some NuGet dependencies. So let's just get started with it. I'm going to be let's put it here. So we are just opening up Visual Studio 2022. Then we say create a new project. And as you may remember, this will be the empty project, so ASP.NET Core empty. But this is actually F#, so that's not the correct one. We're going to be using C#. So C#, ASP.NET Core empty. Next. So let's just stick with the, probably I should put it here. Then we can follow all the namings. So it should be actually provided here. I'm not sure if there's a text saying what the name of the application should be, but I can just type it in. So it's my Forge app. My Forge app. Next, we're going to be sticking with .NET 6.0. We don't care about configuring it for HTTPS. That might add some extra complication. This is how the tutorial has been done. Later on, you can enable it if you need it, but let's just go without the HTTPS support currently. So this is what you end up with. And the next part is adding, well, we can already add these subfolders that we are going to be needing later on. So we can do that as well. So I can just copy the names of these and I can just right click on the project and then say add new folder. So controls is the first and then models. Right click, add new folder. This last one is a special one. So as soon as you're adding this folder, the icon for it should change, just to show you that this will be containing everything on the server side that will be exposed to the user, the HTML files, CSS, JavaScript, so everything related to the user interface as well. And now we can start adding some of the packages that we need. So one of them will be the Forge SDK that we can add. So we can just right click on the project and use the manage NuGet packages in order to edit. So just right click on the project, manage NuGet packages, and then click on browse. And there is Autodesk Forge. We can just stick with the latest version that should be working for us today. So install that. And in this tutorial, we might not need anything else at the moment. So we can continue. We have to change a couple of things in the startup CS file. So you can simply copy all the code from here. So you go into the startup.cs file. So it doesn't exist yet, so we have to create it. So add new item. You can just simply go with class file. That should be fine as well. we're going to be completely changing its content anyway. So it's startup.cs, just double check, yeah, startup.cs, edit. And you can select the whole thing inside it. Oh, I didn't copy the content, so just copy the content as well. Here it is. So as you can see, one of the things it's going to be doing is going to be accessing some of the configuration that we are going to be adding in a second in the app settings.development.js. So that file is going to be containing the Forage client ID and Forage client secret, optional Forage bucket. If you already know the bucket that you want to work with, just notice here that it needs to be a globally unique name, and it needs to be all small case letters as well. So it cannot be uppercase letters. But if you don't provide it, that might be actually the safest option currently, because in that case, we are going to be generating it on the fly for you based on the client ID of your application. So you can be pretty sure that it's going to be a globally unique name. And inside the configuration section, we are just doing a couple of things like use default files. You can, of course, check these, get more information about them on the Microsoft.NET documentation part. But this is going to be exposing, for example, the index.html file. So when you open up our web page in the browser and you just go directly to the root, so you don't even have to type in index.html. So in order to view it, it will automatically resolve to that. Then use static files. This will enable the browser to access all the files that we are going to be adding to www.root, as I said, including the HTML files, of course, then the CSS and JavaScript files. And then these two together, the combination of these, will enable us to expose endpoints on the server, which you will be able to access from the JavaScript code on the client side running inside the browser. So we are going to be adding all these things, all these endpoints inside the controllers folder. We're going to be populating it with various files, which will be exposing these endpoints that we want to make available for the client-side code. So this is all that's happening here. But this text is also explaining all this information for you. So as I said, it's safest might be if you just simply ignore the Forage bucket in this tutorial so that we generate one for you automatically. So we can just go to the app settings development.json file. It should be available right underneath app settings.json. And then we can just simply add these things there so that it will be available for us. So we can just fill it in. I think I had it somewhere already. Here it is. So you just need to fill it in with your client ID and client secret. And then save. And then some more modifications we need to do. So inside the program.cs, we also need to modify the content according to this. So as it says here, it's going to be using the configuration that we provided in the startup class. So you can just copy this code and then go into the programs.cs and then modify the whole thing. Just select everything inside the file and then just copy paste this code here. And of course, each time you do something, best thing is just to Control S or save the file straight away before you lose any of the changes. And finally, we also have to update the launch settings.json file under the properties folder to make sure that our server app is using the default protocol, HTTP, and then we are going to be using port 8080. So as you can see, this is how the information inside that file should look like. It's launch settings.json. So we can just go over there. It should be under properties. As you can see, by default, it assigns some different port to be used by the application. We can just modify it to 8080 again, just save the changes. And you can try it out. So we can run it, but nothing much will happen. But at least we can make sure that the application could compile and it can run. So we can just click the play button, my Forge app. It should automatically build the application for you, and then also kicks off the process and should start up the browser as well, because you can see launch browser option is true. So we just have to wait for that to happen until Chrome will pop up. But as expected, because we don't have any user interface implemented, we don't have an index.html file at the moment. So we just simply get back a 404 or not found error inside the browser. So let's just close it for the time being. And we can move on to the next step, which is related to authentication. So as mentioned here, whenever you're using the viewer, so one way of using the viewer is, of course, this as well needs an access token in order to communicate with Forge. If you remember the slide, I don't know where I put it. Here it is probably, yes. So we can just quickly go back to show. So this is how things work. Because it's trying to communicate directly with the Forge server, therefore, of course, it needs access token, because whenever you want to talk to the Forge services, you need an access token. So what we do is we provide a public access token, which will only have a single functionality enabled for it, which is viewing. So that's what the text here is talking about. It does not actually show the scope that we are going to be using, but it will be somewhere in the code. So that's the only thing that's available for the public token. And the internal token that we keep constantly on the server, so it's never going to leave the server side. So internal token will never leave the server side. That's why it can have all the functionality related to, creating buckets, deleting buckets, uploading files, downloading files, accessing whatever from the Forge service. That's not a problem, because that access token is never going to be exposed to the client side. So bad people cannot take advantage of that access token. On the client side, we're only going to be exposing a public access token, which only has the functionality for viewing those specific files that the viewer is asking for. So this is what this tip section is talking about. So now we can create a Forge service file under the model subfolder. So that's going to be containing some information about, for example, the client ID, client secret, and the bucket name. As you can see, if the configuration was left empty, then we're just going to be generating a name based on the client ID of the application, trying to make sure that it's will be, globally unique name. So let's do that. So Forge service.cs. So we can just go under the models and add new item. So it will be a class. Name will be Forge service.cs. And here again, we can just copy paste the whole thing. And then save your changes. And we are taking advantage of partial functionality. So we have the main class, which is the Forge service class, and then we'll have a Forge service authentication related part in the Forge service.auth.cs file. So we can just call it that, and Visual Studio will automatically organize the content, as you will see it in a second. So we click again on models, add new item, and then class, change the name, and it will automatically pull it under the Forge service file because it's a partial component of it. It just exposes some additional functionality for this class. So again, we can just simply copy paste all the content. So go back to the Forge service.post.cs file. Select everything and then override it with the code that we just copied from the website. And here you can see the functionality related to generating tokens. So you can see that we are going to be generating a public token that will be just with the scope viewable as reads. So that's the only functionality it will enable anyone to do with Forge when they have access to that token. And the internal token that we are going to be using just on the server side, we'll have all these other scopes that we need in order to create the bucket, read the data from the bucket, write, and also create things like creating new files inside the bucket. So you can see that this get token function is simply using the functionality coming from this Autodesk Forge component. Based on the two-legged API, we are going to authenticate, and we just need to pass in the client ID and client secret of our Forge application, and then also provide the scopes that we want to use. And we'll get back straight away an access token. So this is the simplest way of getting an access token from the Forge service. So now that this is done, we also have to update something in the startup.cs file to make a singleton instance of the Forge service. So you can see this is the only thing we just need to add. You can just simply either copy, paste the whole thing, and then just override the whole thing inside the file, or you can just select this section. It's up to you how you prefer it. Just have to make sure that everything looks exactly the same as here. So you can go on the startup.cs file. And you can see this is the part where we need to insert this extra line that's going to be taking advantage of this Forge service. That's going to be using the Forge client ID and client secret, of course, that we provided inside the configuration file, inside app settings development to JSON, and then the name of the Forge bucket as well, which is optional. And here we are going to be exposing an endpoint in order to make the token available for the client side, so that, as I said, on the client side, inside the JavaScript code, where we are going to be initializing the viewer, that's where we also need to talk to our server to get back an access token. And this is the public access token that will only have the viewing capability in it. So what we can do is just create this extra file. So the models folder contains everything related to talking to the Forge server, and the controllers part contains everything related to exposing endpoints. So you can just say new class. We're going to be changing all the content anyway, so it doesn't really matter what you select here actually. So this is the authentication controller, and we can just copy paste the code from here as well. Select everything and then override it. And here you can see the single endpoint that we are exposing called the token. It will be under API, auth, so API /auth, and then /token. This is how you can get to this specific endpoint from the client-side code. And as you can see, it just simply calls the getPublicToken function from this Forge service.auth.cs file in order to get a public access token that we can pass back to the client-side code, so that the viewer will be able to access the relevant things from the forward service and then present the model inside the viewer. So that's all that's happening here. So that's it really. And now you should be able to test a bit more from this, because now even in the root, we still don't have any kind of user interface. At least we have now an endpoint that we can test. So when you run the application again, of course, it's going to build it one more time, taking advantage of all the changes that we added to the project. Again, start up Chrome as well, and if we go directly to the root, we should still give back a 404 error message for us, because we still don't have a user interface. There's no UI for us just yet. But as you've seen, we exposed an endpoint on the server called the API OAuth token. So if we put this in the browser, then it should give us back the public token that the viewer is going to be using. So yeah, this one was successful. We got back the token that we expected. Expires in, usually it's an hour. So whenever you generate an access token, it should be valid for an hour. And then you need to generate a new one. Great, so that's how far we got in the second section. And now it's your turn to follow all these steps, to go along with the tutorials. So again, this is the application setup and authentication, these two steps that you need to go through now. And of course, if you have any questions, then just let me know in the Q&A panel, and I will get back to you. So just getting back to the presentation. I don't know where I left it. It's here. Yeah, so that's really it. Probably it's better actually if I just leave the page on here and then pointing out that this is the last step, how far you have to get. So application setup and authentication. So welcome back. I hope you managed to finish these two steps. So application setup and authentication. So we can add now some more functionality. And there was some questions related to the token usage. So for example, in the tutorial that we're finishing today, the only consumption is related to the translation part, so the derivative services. So when you're translating the model to the SVF format that the viewer understands, you will be charged for that. But once the model is translated, you can keep showing it inside the viewer on your web page for free. So there are no additional costs for that. So let's get back to the presentation. Where did I leave it? Here it is. So this is what you hopefully finished, the application setup and authentication. And now it's about uploading and translating the models. So again, for example, when you upload the model to the Forge service, that doesn't cost cloud credits either. So in this section, then we are doing implementing the logic for listing and uploading files into the bucket. This is your application's own private bucket. Then the logic for translating designs. And then we'll also expose endpoints for these functions and then test them out as well. So let's just have a look. So this is about the data management API and the derivative service. So let's see, what do we have to do? First of all, we'll implement the functionality related to creating a bucket and uploading a file into the bucket. So just these two things. So what we need to do is create a file called forgeservice.oss.cs. Again, you remember we already have a file called forgeservice.cs. So taking advantage of the partial implementation inside Visual Studio, or basically the .NET environment, we can add some extension to it or provide some extra functionality for that class. So if you go back to here, so as you can see, it should be under the models. So you can just say model, add new item. You can just go with the class. We're going to be overriding completely the content in it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And now we can just grab the code from here, and then we can look through what's inside it. So just copy the whole thing, select everything inside the file, overwrite it, and make sure you're also saving the changes, of course. So you can see all the functionality that this service provides. One of them is about making sure that the bucket exists. So if it doesn't already exist, then we are going to be creating it. And someone also asked about usage of the tokens. So as you can see on the server side, whenever we are interacting with Forge, we can take advantage of the internal token, which we provide, which has all the scopes enabled on it pretty much. And it's okay, it's safe, because this internal token is never going to leave the server. So it won't get accidentally exposed to third parties and they could take advantage of it. So in this first function where we are ensuring the bucket exists, first of all, we are just trying to get the details of the specific bucket. And of course, if it doesn't exist yet, we are going to get an error, the 404, which is not found. In which case, we are going to be trying to create this bucket, just taking advantage of the buckets API that is coming from the Autodesk.Forge SDK. And the second part is about uploading the model. So again, this is something we are going to be also exposing through the controllers for the client-side code, this upload model, where you can specify the name of the model you want to upload, and of course, the binary content of the file. First of all, we are making sure that the bucket exists. Then again, just like in the previous call, we are using the internal token, and then using the upload resources function of the API in order to upload into the specific bucket the item. And last one is just getting all the objects which have already been uploaded into the bucket. So the objects basically mean files. So get objects or get files. And you can just use the get objects async function of the API in order to get that. And again, we are going to be exposing this functionality to the client-side code as well through the controllers in a second. So the client-side code will be able to call this endpoint and get back the list of all the files which are already available inside the bucket. And then inside the user interface, inside the drop-down button on the bottom or the top right corner in the user interface, we're going to be listing all those files. And then you will be able to select the one that you're interested in, and we are going to be loading it inside the viewer. So that's all that's really going on here. And because there's like a paging functionality, so if you have loads of files available, probably it won't be the case today. Especially if you're just getting started with Forge, you won't have many files available inside the bucket. I can't remember the size it is, whether it's 10 files per page, or is it like even more, or 100? But anyway, so this is how you can check. So when you get back the list of objects available inside the bucket, you might also get, as part of the response, a next URL that you can use in order to get back the next page or list of files which are available inside the bucket. And you can just keep calling the same API and again to get back all the files which are available inside your bucket. So that's all that's happening here. And this part explains it as well for you. And as I said, when you provided the bucket name, it needs to be globally unique. So that's why I said probably the easiest is if you don't even provide it inside the app settings, development, the JSON file. I didn't provide the bucket name, which means that the tutorial will just automatically generate one based on your client ID, which will make sure that it's very likely it will be completely unique globally. So then you don't have to care about it much. So that was the data management API part about making sure the bucket exists. Then we are uploading objects to it, into it, and also getting back all the objects which are already available inside the bucket. And now we can get on to the derivative service. This is about translating the uploaded file into the viewable format. So all we have to do, we are creating a service for this as well. So this will be the derivative service. We just call it forservice.deriv.cs. So we can also add this to the models. Add new item class, just override the name. And just copy the whole thing. So select everything inside the file and then just paste in the new content, and then of course save your changes. You can look through what exactly is happening here. So there's like a helper function here. It's going to enable us to base64 encode the URLs or the URNs or the file identifier that is going to be needed by the model derivative service. Then translate the model. You're just simply calling the translate async function. You also have to provide a payload for that. You have to tell which file you want to translate, and also provide information about the translation you want to do, what format you want to translate to, because it's not only SVF that you can translate to files. Depending on the file format, whether it's a Revit file or Inventor file, you have other options to translate files into. So if you just simply go on the documentation on the Forge website, documentation, then model derivative, then we provide a list of all the supported translations that you can select from. So you can see, for example, in case of an FBX file, these are the export formats available. But all of the files actually support SVF and SVF2. So if you have a very large model, it's usually like construction models or plants or buildings. That's when it's probably worth translating into SVF2. That should be faster for you. And all of these file formats you can also actually translate to OBJ as well. So some of them, as you can see, you can translate to OBJ directly. So you can just ask for the OBJ translation. And some of them, first you have to translate to SVF, and then you can translate to OBJ. And there are some step-by-step tutorials, so you can have a look through them as well. How you can translate to various file formats, how you can translate the file if it consists of multiple files. Let's say you're dealing with an inventor assembly, which has additional sub-assemblies or parts, so it consists of multiple files. So how you could, for example, zip up the whole thing and then tell the model derivative service which is the main file or starting point for the translation. So all these things are described in the documentation. And inside the API reference, if you go to the jobs and start translation job, then you should also find more information about the various formats that you're translating into, what you need to provide as input, output, what kind of formats are available, and some additional options depending on the input file format. So if you're working with a Navisworks file or this view file, I don't know what that is, or depending on what kind of output you're trying to get from the original file. If you trying to translate it to STP or STEP, then what kind of options are also available for you. So all these things are listed under the post-start translation job, which is the post endpoint of the model derivative service that we are using as well. So this is the exact endpoint this function is calling, the translate async. And this is where we are setting up the job payload. Again, the input, which is based on the object ID, we are generating this base64 encoded format. And then we are also specifying the format that we want to translate to. In this case, is the SVF format. And we say that accidentally it's 2D, 2D. I'm pretty sure it should be 3D and 2D. This is something we need to change on the website. So what it means is that we are trying to translate to SVF, and we are interested in both 3D and 2D content inside the model. So for example, if you're working with a Revit model, that can have 2D sheets in it, and of course 3D views as well. So you can say that I want to translate all those for me. So when you're viewing it in the model, then using one of the extensions inside the viewer, you can just select the given content that you want to view from the, for example, Revit model. And here's another function, the get translation status. So when you kick off the translation, of course, it starts working on it, but it's not going to finish straight away. So one way of dealing with it is you can just keep asking the translation service, how far it got. So you just get back the latest manifest. This manifest file contains information about all the various translations that you requested for a given file, and also about the progress, how far it got, if it failed for some reason, because maybe some referenced files were missing in order to, completely translate the model or something else. So you can just always keep asking for the latest manifest with details about the translation, and then we can check, if the translation finished or not. And then we can provide the status back to the client-side code. Again, this is something that we are going to be exposing in one of the controllers. So here we are, derivatives. So this was all about the services. And now the server endpoints. Again, whenever we are implementing the functionality on the server side that's communicating with Forge, we tend to also expose the same functionality to the client-side code through endpoints. And those are always inside controllers. So I can just take this model controller CS and create that file inside the controllers. So add new item, class, just change the name. We can just copy the whole thing, select everything inside the file, update it, and then here we go. And as you can see, this will be the root of the endpoints that we are exposing here. So it will be API /models without the controller part. So API /models, then / the various endpoints we are exposing. One of them will be URN and then / status. So using this endpoint, you can just pass in the URN that you're interested in, and then it's going to be calling this function that we were just implementing inside the Forge service file. So getting the latest manifest for the given file, and then checking the status for the translation that we requested. And then another endpoint, it's about upload and translate model. So we can just send the post request to this endpoint in order to upload the file. Also specify the name of the file that we want to upload. It will be coming from the form. And then so you can just use the upload model function that we implemented in the Forge services file. And then straight away, once it got uploaded, we also kick off the translation of the model. So we are calling that post translation endpoint that I was pointing at here in the documentation. So this is the endpoint again that is being used in the background, this post job endpoint. And then we are returning some object back. So this will be, the string will be based on the object key and then the URN of the file. That's what we are going to be returning when the client is calling this endpoint. So the controller, we handle these 3 types of requests. We just went through them. So one of them is the API models, get the list of the models, API models URN status, get back the latest manifest for the given file and then get the status of the given translation that we started. And then also post models when you're trying to upload a model. So this is how far we got in the third section of the tutorials. And one thing you can check, well, since we don't have anything in the bucket that we created, so probably it's going to be returning with an empty array as it's pointed out here, but you can test it if you want to. So what we can do is we can just click the play button again. It will it's going to be building the project, and then kick off the web service, and then open up Chrome as well, of course. And we still don't have the UI. So in the root, it's still going to provide us with a 404 not found message. That's completely fine. As you've seen before, we already have the endpoint implemented for getting the access token. Now we have an extra endpoint, which is about getting back the list of models in the given, inside the given bucket. But it should be empty because we don't have anything there just yet. So this is as expected. This is how far we got. But later on, once we implemented more functionality, you uploaded something into the bucket, then of course, when you check this endpoint, you will see the list of all the files that are available inside your bucket. So again, this is how far we got in this third section. And now it's your turn to go through these steps. I'm just going back here. So again, this is just the data and derivatives section that you have to go through in the tutorials on the tutorials webpage. And if you have any questions, then just let me know. Yeah, so we reached the last step. One thing I would point out is that, as I mentioned it while we were implementing things, that there was one typo in here, which was about asking for the translation. So just make sure that inside your forgeservice.deriv.cs file, where it's asking for the translation, you know, it's called the translate model function. So inside there, when it's asking for translation, change it to so that one of them is a 3D and the other ones remains a 2D. So it's going to be generating translation for both 3D and 2D content of the model. So that's just one thing. But apart from that, we can continue. So I just go back to my presentation. So now finally, we add the viewer and the user interface as well. So all we need to do is now we start populating the www root with content. So we are adding the viewer.js file, which is specific just for viewer initialization. Then we have the main.js, which will also include things like subscribing to the events related to the dropdown, for example, so that when you select a different model, then we are going to be loading that into the viewer. And of course, adding the HTML page, index HTML, and the related styles in main.css. So yeah, so that's all we are going to be doing. So I'm just going to close this application because we don't need it now to be running. And we can start adding content. So where are we? Here we are. So this is the last step, viewer and UI. Well, that's Node.js related, so we don't have to care about that. So first of all, the viewer logic. So viewer.js file, we can just place it under the www root. So add new file. You could probably select whatever you want because we are going to be renaming it anyway, but okay, let's just go with, where is it? JavaScript file, but as I said, I'm going to be changing the name anyway, and then completely change the content in it. So you can just copy paste it here. And now you can see the various endpoints that we implemented on the server side in the various controllers, authentication controller and models controller. So this is now in the client side code. which is running inside the browser. That's where we are going to be taking advantage of those endpoints in order to get some functionality. One of them is getting the token. This is going to be getting a public token that the viewer is going to be using. And this is the init viewer function. That's all really you need to use. You need to do. First of all, you just need to initialize the viewer just once, then create a new instance inside that of a GUI viewer 3D. So there are two versions. There's the viewer 3D, and there's one which will also include the user interface, which is the various palettes that are there, you know, the properties palette, the model browser palette, and also the toolbars. So that's why we need the GUI version of it. Because once we do that, we can just start it. We can also change the theme, whether you wanted the toolbar buttons to look like a light themed or a dark themed. That's really it. And once we've done that, we can start loading the various models. So as I said, you know, we have the drop-down button in the user interface in the top right corner. That's going to be listing all the files which are available inside your bucket. And then using this load model function, then we will be able to just load those into the viewer. And then the URN is the base64 encoded identifier of the file that includes, you know, the name of the bucket and also the name of the file. And that's really all for the viewer. So again, this just talks you through some of the code in it. Now we can add the main.js file. Again, this goes into the www root as well. So we can just add another JavaScript file, change the name to main.js. And again, just copy all the code into it. So as you can see, first of all, it's going to be referencing the viewer.js that we just created previously. So it's going to be using two functions from it. One is just initializing the viewer. You only need to do that once. And as you can see it here, it's already calling it. When this file is loaded into the browser, it's going to automatically call init viewer as well. And then the other one is load model. So again, as I said, once the user selects any of the files inside the drop-down button or drop-down editor or whatever it's called, drop-down box, then we are going to be using load model in order to load the specific model into the viewer. So this is about setting up the model selection. So we are just getting access to this drop-down button. Then we are going to be populating it with the models which are currently available inside the bucket. So we are calling this endpoint. This is going to be providing us with a list of the files inside the bucket. And then based on that, we're just populating it and also setting up the on-change event for the dropdown, so that when one of them files is selected, then we can react to it and then load the model. And then set up model upload. So we're going to have a button that you can click in order to upload a given file. So of course we have to set up the event handler for that as well. And the input item is going to be containing the files that you selected for upload. And here's the last thing, I think. There are still a couple of things here. So one of them is the onModel selected event. Again, this is just for the drop-down button. So when a given model is selected, then we are going to be loading the model. First of all, we are just checking the status. This is again another endpoint that we are exposing through the models controller.cs file. So based on the status, we can check if it's not available, it has not even been translated, or maybe it's still translating, or the translation failed. Then we are popping up various notifications for the user. Otherwise, if everything seems to be okay, we are going to be loading it into the viewer. And then these are just for the notifications. Show a notification, then clear the notification. And then we can add the user interface, so index.html. Everything is going into the www root. So you can add a new item. You can select HTML page, but again, we are going to be overwriting completely its content anyway. So we can just copy everything from here and paste it into here. And you can see how, just really just a few lines of code, well, of tags basically inside the HTML file. We just have a header with some logo, the title, then the upload button that enables you to upload your file. Then also the input for the file that you can select inside the browser. And then we have the preview div and then the overlay for the notifications. And then we're just referencing these two files. One of them is the viewer library from the Forge website. And the other one is, of course, the main.js file that we already added to the project. And that's really it. And then last but not least, I think that's the last thing. We are just adding the CSS part. So just the style sheets for our HTML page. We can just click here again, add new item. Style sheets. Change the name. And then fetch the content from here. And overwrite everything inside the file. And it's just the usual things, setting margins, padding, basically just setting up the layout for everything. I'm not sure why this got moved in here. Maybe that's the logic for it. You can play with this as well if you want. Yeah, you can add the favicon if you want to. Even without that, of course, it's going to be working fine. But this is the icon that's going to be shown in the browser, when your application starts up. So you can just use your own logo or whatever one you want to use and just place it in the www root folder and just call it favicon.ico. And that's it really. You can also download these if you want to use them for the favicon and the logo. And that should be it. So hopefully everything should be working now fine. You can also download sample files referenced in the tip section. So you can click here and download one of the sample files. I think I have something on my system already. So I can try to test it with that. Let's see what I have in the downloads folder. But now we can run the application. So just click the play button. As you can see now, we have everything inside the www root. We have the HTML, the CSS, and the two JavaScript files, one specific to the viewer, and the main.js is about setting up things for the user interface. So this time around, we should not get a 404 message because now we do have an interface, a user interface. We have the index.html, which should show up here. But as you can see, currently we don't have anything inside the dropdown because we don't have anything inside that bucket. So what we can do is we can just click the upload button, and then I should be able to find something, hopefully in my downloads folder. Let's see if this one works. RIC Advanced Sample Project. So this might take a while because it's quite a few megabytes, I think, but we'll see what happens. At least it's good for testing. And that's uploaded. So that should have kicked off the translation as well. I'm not sure if it's already finished translating. We'll find out. So I'm just going to select it again. It's just refresh in case it's needed. Yeah, so the model is still being translated, 0% complete. So we just have to wait a bit. Probably I should have chosen a simpler model, but you can work with your own models as well. As you can see, it keeps updating. So now it's 15% complete, 32%. And almost there. And this is what I mentioned to you. So there's an extension that you can include in the viewer called this document browser. And what it enables you to do is when you click on it, it will tell you or list you all the various views which are available for the file. So as I mentioned, in case of the Revit model, you can have 3D content, multiple different 3D views, and also 2D views. So you can just switch between them using this extension. So I can click on if you want to load in the 2D content that is available as well. But basically, it looks like everything is working fine, and I hope it will work for you too. So let's see if there's anything less to do here. Yeah, so that's really it for today. As I said, I'm going to be around. So if you have any questions, you run into any problems, I will try my best to help. And then tomorrow we'll have the session will be similar in the way that, that as well be implementing a similar user interface. And also we'll take advantage of the viewer in order to display the selected model inside the viewer. The difference is that in this case, we are going to be showing models that are uploaded into your own Autodesk storage account, whether it's Fusion Team, BIM 360 Docs, or ACC, or Autodesk Docs. It's going to enable you to list all those hubs and projects, folders and files and versions that are available to you. And when you click on one of those files, if they were already translated, then they will be loaded into the viewer. And then on Thursday, it's all about viewer customization. So we don't even have a separate .NET and the Node.js specific session running in parallel, because it's all just client-side code playing with the JavaScript API. So it's going to show you how you can work with the various data that was extracted from the original model into the viewable format, and how you can create dashboards, for example, from that data. And then last, on Friday, it will be about configurators and using the data or the design automation API, which is available for 4 of our desktop products. So 3ds Max, AutoCAD, Inventor, and Revit. And that will enable you to modify your existing models or create completely new models like Inventor files, Inventor assemblies, Revit files, and so on. And then also can preview the result of what's going on the design automation server. So that's for Friday. And if you need any more help, then you can use Stack Overflow. That's probably the best place. Then multiple members of our team can help out, answer the question, or even other third parties who are very familiar by now with the Forge APIs can help you out. These are the main tags that you can use: Autodesk Forge, Autodesk Viewer, Autodesk Model Derivative, and Autodesk Design Automation. And on the Forge Developer Portal, you can also find a menu item under Support, Get Help, that will again tell you that there is a Stack Overflow available, and also provides you an email address that you can use, forage.help@autodesk.com, if you want to ask any question in private, you don't want to discuss it in public for some reason. So after this event, once we went through all the sessions, these are all recorded, so we'll make them available on YouTube and then provide a link to them. Also to the slides that we use during the sessions, a survey link about the presentations to get some feedback from you. And if you want to take your newly acquired skills to the next level, you can take advantage of Forge accelerators, which are currently mainly happening online. So if you have some kind of idea for a given project and you need help with implementing that, then you can apply for this event. And then throughout a week, we will be there online, and then through the Slack channel, we can continuously communicate, and also set up just, one-on-one meetings if needed, if you want to discuss something. We also have a link to Forge Lightning talks. They are really, small talks related to various parts of the Forge components. I think most of them are around 5 minutes to 15 minutes. And of course, we also have the Forge blog, forge.autodesk.com/blog, where we keep blogging about various topics and covering loads of questions that keep popping up again and again. Then we write a nice detailed article about them. So you should definitely check this out as well. Yes, and then there's Autodesk University as well, so you can actually check that out as well. So you will find Autodesk University on, if you just Google for it, and that will be full of Forge-related content as well that you can watch, of course. So that was it. So thanks for joining this session about these tutorials. I will keep staying online. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.